Meditations with Ryan Slomak.
Hello, everybody on Earth, or I think you're probably from Earth. Welcome to the Meditations Podcast. This is episode 42, and it's a show dedicated to making space for conversation with interesting people just to see what we can learn along the way. I'm your host, Ryan Slomak, and I'm stoked, over the moon, aiming for the stars, because this is episode 42. And if you're a Douglas Adams fan, you know that 42 is the answer to everything. And today, our answer to everything is Erin Winick Anthony. Erin is a science communicator that has worked with some amazing clients, whether it be NASA or her own company, Sci Chic, or Zero G, or everything in between, taking high-level science concepts and then making them accessible and inspiring through the use of social media, through the use of her writing, through documentary filmmaking, through any sort of means of communication to make it so that people fall in love with science again. In this episode, we're going to hear her journey studying mechanical engineering, discovering a way to sort of start her own company in the world of fashion, and then eventually translate that into a more formal science communication position, working for NASA and having some interesting experiences with Snoopy, and then eventually starting her own company, Steam Power Media, and working with clients all over the place. We'll also jump into her various hobbies and just learn more about what happens behind the scenes in some of our favorite scientific experiments. So without further ado, here is Erin Winick Anthony. Erin, thanks so much for coming on the show. I feel like we're still in February. It's the month of love, and I love science. I know you love science, so this will be a
Yes.
really good time for us to bring out our, I don't know, inner PBS kid, for which I hear you have referred to yourself as. And I guess I'm kind of curious, just like, we're going to start right at the beginning. Like, what was the early life of Erin like? And when did you start to discover this sort of passion for science education?
Yeah, I grew up in Florida, and I was surrounded by the space shuttle program a lot growing up. Growing up in there, you got to walk out on your front lawn and see, solid rocket boosters fall off of a shuttle and feel the sonic booms shaking your like sliding glass door in your house. So I feel like I grew up in a way that I felt weirdly connected to space in a way that I think a lot of people don't, because there's that like literal, tangible connection of like that sound and that visual and everything. And I had a couple family members who worked for the space program. So it's always been around me in some capacity. But honestly, most of my family is teachers, like, K through 12 education teachers. So I've kind of found a way to combine all of that. I didn't see this as a path for myself. I didn't really know that this being a science communicator, what I do now is a job path that's available to people more than like just Bill Nye, like the one person to host a thing. So as a kid, I was always making a lot of stuff. I was surrounded by people who really cared about space and education. And I think just growing up in that environment led me to where I am now, even if I didn't know it back then.
Fair enough. What was like, so I have a very vivid memory of us going down to Florida one year and there happening to be a shuttle launch. And, this was the late 90s, I assume, but,
Mhm.
it was a full day affair. I mean, going like making a picnic, like going and hanging out on the beach, sort of waiting for that moment to be surrounded by that all the time. I'm sure was just infectious. What type of roles did your family members have, in the space program?
Yeah, so my one of my grandfathers worked on the solid rocket boosters for the shuttle program, as well as worked on the Saturn 1B rocket with more of a manufacturing engineering capacity. My Aunt Jenny worked in more of an administrative role at one point, and another grandfather worked in more of the defense area for like satellite communications and a lot of like engineers, that sort of thing, and that type of job.
Interesting. And like, maybe this is the question I should have started off with, but like, when you hit the age of like 5, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I always didn't know. And I think that was like, people always ask me as a kid, and I was like, I'll make up something. I'll say a teacher like everyone else in my family. But honestly, I really didn't know. I knew the things that I liked doing. I remember like, this is a weird thought to have as a kid going of like, oh no, I hear all these stories of all these people that like I admire being like, ah, yes, I knew what I wanted to be when I was a kid. I'm like, I don't know, am I doomed for the rest of my life already? But I think I bounced back and forth between a lot of things. I was a lot shyer as a kid than I am now, so I didn't wasn't thinking, I was going to go down that Bill Nye path or something like that. But I've always enjoyed that education and I think learning aspect of it.
And what about, we're going to talk about it a little bit more later, but like, what about your creative side? I mean, you're somebody who
Mhm.
like, I really appreciate the way in which you merge science and technology and art so
Mhm.
often. What about sort of like creative projects and the sort of like creative side of you as a kid?
Yeah, I've always loved making stuff in every capacity, whether my mom would save all the paper towel rolls that we had so I could make little marble runs from it around the house. I sewed Halloween costumes with my mom every year. I think she's a very creative person, even if she's not an engineer by trade. Her education is in social work. But I think she was someone who we always made all of my, birthday party stuff from scratch. It was never going to Party City and buying stuff. It was building little things from the ground up. And I think being around her and learning just everything from watercolors to sewing and that sort of thing. And then also, getting me a little kit of Legos that I had this same container of Legos for like my whole life. My parents just retired and moved, and I found it the other day. I'm like, I need to keep that for sure. So I think I was just always surrounded by lots of opportunities to make. And I didn't really even think about it as something strange. It's just when I had free time, I was never the kid who'd wanted to sit in front of the TV for a long time. I had to go do something with my hands, and it's grown. I still love doing that sort of thing now.
I love it. You talked about the marble run thing. Any other sort of like grandiose children's projects that you did that just like stand out as these monumental moments for you?
Yeah, I made a Rube Goldberg machine, which I think is like the next iteration on that, on like the stand that my parents' TV was on, and it like went all around the TV and that sort of thing. That was like I made, and then it was like the early days of, Windows Movie Maker, and so I made like a whole little movie about it and stuff. And then my one of my favorite like gifts I ever got as a kid was a big K'NEX roller coaster kit, because I'm also grew up in Florida, a big roller coaster kid. I grew up near Busch Gardens, and speaking of other things that are like engineering around you all the time, roller coaster designer was on the list of things I wanted to be for a bit, but I made like a model roller coaster out of K'NEX that had like a working chain lift and stuff. And that was my favorite.
I feel like the rule about Florida is you have to either be surrounded by amusement parks or by space exploration. There's like no in between.
Yeah, or and for me, I got a little bit of both.
That's awesome. You eventually went to University of Florida, if I understand, to study mechanical engineering. And I'm curious about like leading up to that point, like the as somebody who's worked in high schools for a long time and
Yeah.
has seen hundreds of students struggle with that decision. How did you end up making your way specifically to mechanical engineering? Like, what about that excited you?
Yeah, when I went to college, I was really debating between majoring in journalism or engineering, which now looking at what I do makes a lot of sense. But I was editor-in-chief of my high school paper. Like, I really loved the journalism aspect of things. I had won some news writing awards and stuff, but at the same time, I was loved making stuff and was very good in my science classes. So I was really torn. And part of the reason I picked the University of Florida is they have a great journalism and a great engineering program. Um, and when I went to college, I was actually my declared major was exploratory engineering, which is something University of Florida allows you to do, saying like, I think I want to do engineering, but I don't know what type yet. And you can take because all of the classes you take when you're starting out as an engineer are pretty much the same. And I was taking a bunch of different stuff, and I decided, I really like both of these things, but I think it'd be easier to go back to journalism than back to engineering. Like I wanted to get the technical background. And so honestly, that's kind of what I did. Now I use that engineering background in kind of my like journalism and communications that I do. But I was really glad to have that time as like an exploratory major to be able to not feel fully locked in and committed right off the bat. I took an engineering 101 class that let me take like a little sampling of biological engineering and chemical engineering, industrial, mechanical, all of those things. And I ended up, I was torn between material engineering, industrial engineering, and mechanical. But the thing that like solidified it for me was taking design and manufacturing lab, which tapped into that love of making. I learned how to use a mill and a lathe and weld and started to do computer aided design classes and learn SolidWorks, the software that you use for a lot of designing and engineering. And that's what tapped into my like that artistic maker side that I love so much and solidified mechanical for me.
And I also love the fact that like building marble runs is probably really good practice for mechanical engineering.
100%. Absolutely.
Interesting. I wasn't expecting the sort of like makerspace component to like really come out kind of there.
Mhm.
What like this is going to sound like a dumb sort of layman's level question, but like one of my favorite things is the fact that like the term engineer is this like term that like engineers know what it means and the rest of the world is like, oh, they're an engineer. So like how do you describe mechanical engineering to somebody in very simple terms?
Yeah, well, I'll say I think engineering has a PR problem and that like it's very hard to explain and there's not a lot of people doing it. I'll say I think the reason why is it's a lot of the application of science. So you have to kind of have this core understanding of physics and then apply it. So it's kind of like it's the second notch forward that like kind of has like a barrier to entry that feels confusing. But the way I describe engineering as a whole is it's problem solving applied to a specific field. And so for computer engineers, it's using code and things like that as your problem solving tool and tool to make things. Mechanical engineering, it's more on the physical side of things and construction of stuff, and understanding the physics behind that. A lot of your classes are studying everything from how heat affects physical structures to how fluids flow, which can include air and water, affects things. So it's really making and problem solving in whatever your initial field is. So industrial, chemical, biological, whatever that first term is, that's kind of the area that you're applying that to.
Wow, you're like good at your job. Nice communication
Hey,
job there, Aaron.
thank you. I appreciate it. I've had to talk about that a few times. So,
I do think it's an interesting thing, and I don't bring it up just as like a quick test, but I think it's just something that's important in the sense that like engineering is problem solving elevated. And
yeah.
like in my experience, like as we think about like teaching kids about what they want to do when they grow up, like all kids want to be problem solvers, and it's a matter of like, are you a storytelling problem solver? Are you a
Hmm.
science-based problem solver? Are you a socially based problem solver? And I always have felt like the word engineering is something that like if it had entered my vernacular and if I had understood it decades earlier, I probably would have a very different career path. So
Yeah.
I want to highlight that because I think it's important for people to really just deconstruct that language.
Absolutely. I agree. Like I said, it's confusing and I understand why. Like no blame or shade on anyone for not knowing what it is. It's hard to know unless you're in it and actually doing it.
Awesome. So, so you're studying mechanical engineering and it sounds like you're kind of figuring out makerspace too. I'm curious about when it's not the term, but the field science communication entered your awareness.
Mhm.
What was your sort of entry point to understanding that that field existed?
I think that it wasn't, I can't think of one specific moment that it happened, the kind of evolution was I went into engineering thinking, is there a way that I can still combine my love of writing specifically? Because at that point, that was the focus. And initially, I looked at technical writing because that's what all my engineering professors knew about and told me about, which is more thinking about writing, factory instructions or technical manuals and things like that that are being used in a much more corporate or like university environment. But I found some opportunities to do some part-time writing that skewed a little bit more in the science journalism direction. So I did some writing for an engineering education company that is no longer in business, but I got to write more of like middle school level descriptions of engineering topics. I did a little bit of freelancing for like a local business magazine. And I wrote some articles for engineering.com. So like I started to kind of just like dabble in these areas, which were really just my part-time job while I was in college, to earn some money. It was like using my skill set. And I was like, wait a second, this is an area of intersection that I'm really good at and not a lot of people like to do. Not a lot of engineers like to write. The stereotype is true, sadly, a lot of the time. And so I found this niche of being able to combine those, which is kind of when I came to science communication of being like, okay, that's kind of the term that describes overarching what I've been doing this whole time.
Well, I just think, excuse me, I think it's really interesting just in the sense that I was doing some research about like the history of science communication before this interview.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I'm going to completely forget all of it as I'm trying to explain it. But the thing that I thought was really interesting is that, like, we look at people like you had mentioned, Bill Nye the Science Guy. We got like Neil deGrasse Tyson is kind of like the
Yep.
big kahuna right now. But like Carl Sagan and,
Yeah.
Stephen Hawking, people who like have like made their name because they were willing to take the time to understand high level concepts and then communicate them down to into simple manners that anybody could understand. Did you have some sort of like science communication like mentor or like any sort of like systems within your college experience to kind of help you guide in that direction, or did you sort of like build the track while the train was running?
I honestly did not. My biggest community was online, and finding other, especially women in STEM that were doing some social media communication, science communication. Because yeah, you're right. Growing up, all the people that you named, plus I think the Mythbusters was my other one that I loved. But if you think about it, they were all guys. I wasn't any real women science communicators, and when I came across this. I wasn't big on social media because again, I used to be a lot more shy and I didn't share everything I did like I do now. But I found all of these incredible women with PhDs and engineering backgrounds that were sharing science in Instagram specifically was the big one. Now we have TikTok and Threads and all these other places too. But honestly, it was really inspiring to me to be like, oh, wow, they've found a career doing this. And I think we'll probably talk about it in a minute, but it's kind of what led me to doing Sci Chic, a company that I made that made 3D printed science and engineering inspired jewelry. And when I made this company, I had to be more public and I needed to kind of share what I was doing. And that's what encouraged me to be more open and kind of find some of these online friendships with some of these mentors who were doing things that were similar.
I want to come to Sci Chic in just one second, but I want to stay on this
Yeah.
point just a little bit longer. In regards to like finding those online communities, one of the things that I find fascinating about your career as opposed to a lot of the other sort of I almost feel like I'm trying to separate things in my brain between science communicator and science influencer in the
Sure.
sense that like there's a number of people that like have careers in science and are showcasing what they're doing through online means, whereas like what you're doing is you're helping companies figure out the best way to communicate their ideas through social media. Am I
Yeah.
understanding that correctly?
Yeah. I don't have a big following on YouTube. I don't have as many, I don't have a million followers on TikTok. I have like a decent following on all social platforms, but it's because I spend a lot of my time making content for other people, whether it's other scientists or engineers.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm curious about is like as you were scouring your smartphone trying to find people who were doing what you wanted to do, uh what types of people did you find that were focusing specifically on science communication and not necessarily on highlighting the work that they were doing? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I'll call a couple names to call out. Alex Danis, she's really cool. She runs her own. It's a video focused company, so she does a lot of like small documentaries for similar types of people that I do, as well as more science organizations. Um, Science Sam, Samantha Yamin, she does some similar work in Canada, but both of them have PhDs. One of them is in genetics, and the other, I believe, is in like molecular biology. I can't remember the specific niche of what she does. And she actually just announced that she's going to be hosting a podcast for Discovery, which is very cool. Um, and there was a group called the STEM Squad, which was like a Facebook group at the time that was a bunch of people that were doing this or like kind of starting out doing this too. But essentially it's a lot of people running their own small businesses. Maynard Hip Hop Science MD is the other one I'd call out too. All of them kind of have their own small little companies and create content for themselves, yes, but also are doing content creation for the Museum of Science in Boston or Red Bull and things like that. Maynard did some stuff at their breakdancing competition this past year. So, like I said, they're people that don't necessarily have those million follower marks, but it's because they're focusing on making stuff for people a lot more than just themselves.
Awesome. I really appreciate you breaking that down just because I think it's, as we get into the nitty gritty of what you do on a daily basis, it's just really important to like focus on the fact that like there's people who happen to have stature that can then use that social media to build upon their own stature. And
Uh-huh.
I think where you guys just really make magic happen is going in and saying, hey, you're awesome. You're doing awesome stuff. Let me help you communicate this awesome on a level that more people will find accessible. And
Yeah.
to find that community online, I'm sure was just like completely eye-opening when you finally discovered them.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially as they shared resources and opportunities, because it's a hard thing to just jump into. Most of these people are single entrepreneurs, but a number of them have gotten their start at places like NASA or science journalism type jobs and things like that. So it was good to kind of see these people who are then sharing opportunities that can kind of be a ramp to come in.
I love it. So let's talk about jewelry, shall we?
Sure.
Tell me about Sci Chic and how that project came to be.
Sure. One of the things I learned is it's a very hard company name to say, and I didn't realize that at the time. And my God, the number of times I was like, man, I would have picked a different company name if I had known that at the beginning. Um, when I was in college, I'm figuring out kind of that next step for myself. I was considering getting a minor in entrepreneurship because I was you can see a lot of the direction that people in science communication work is an entrepreneurship, running your own business type of job. Um, and I was talking with one of my professors, an engineering entrepreneurship professor, which was very cool. I took that class and was very helpful. And I was telling him about my plan. He was like, "You should just start a company. You'll learn more that way." So I started this company, which was kind of where my interests were at the time. It combined making, which was actually creating 3D printed science and engineering inspired jewelry, and doing CAD design. I was designing all of these in SolidWorks, computer aided design. Um, and then being more public about, sharing the educational materials that paired with all of these things. And, I really wanted to create designs that weren't just, t-shirts that had a typical science pun on them, which are great, but there are many. And I wanted to create these pieces of jewelry to be conversation starters for especially women in STEM to be able to wear and then spark a conversation about science. Because people are often, when you wear something, people are then excited to ask about it, and it creates a very good entry point for people to be able to more openly talk about something that might feel very unapproachable, usually, which is why it was really fun to be able to take on a bunch of different science topics and ideas and turn them into visual art.
Yeah, like so. I gotta tell you, if so, for listeners out there, if you haven't, sadly, Sci Chic is no longer a full-time running company. Erin is too busy making things that involve zero gravity.
Yes.
But going and checking out the products that you created are awesome. Like I as soon as I scrolled and I saw the strong independent variable sticker,
Yes.
I was laughing out loud. And then as a programming teacher, your for loop necklace.
Oh, yeah.
Brought me so much joy. Tell us a little bit about the sort of development procedures that you underwent to make sure that you had products that were fit for the community.
Yeah, and I'll say if you are interested in any of them, some of them are still sold through Startorialist, which is a really cool women-run space fashion company. They bought my designs when I decided to stop running it, so there's still a few that they have. I think it's my moon phases necklace and my solar eclipse necklace, and maybe my James Webb Space Telescope. So if you're interested, you can go check them out there still. But the development process was usually like I often would get inspired by something that I was seeing again online or social media, or just from an area of science that was very close to my heart. And I do some initial sketching on paper, similar to a lot of what a typical engineering design process is. I even would use my engineering paper sometimes, which is like this green paper with like a grid pattern on it, which I shared on social media and apparently is going out of style. Apparently, I'm getting old now. And then I would turn to my engineering design software, which, like I said, usually was SolidWorks. That's the one I had access to as a student. And honestly, they've been a great partner and been able to give me access to it, which is typically an enterprise expensive engineering software. But sometimes it also use something called Tinkercad, which is a free program because it's something that anyone can use. And it was fun to be able to show people that anyone could do this 3D design. I would make some initial file and then go over to, I still have a 3D printer over there, and I have one newer one, and go do a test print in plastic. And if it was something there was something I wanted to change, something about the size, especially, or the balance of it. Sometimes if you were doing something bigger, there'd be like some weird weight stuff with it. And I'd find the design that I really liked. And then I'd also figure out printing it in metal. I had a supplier called Shapeways, where I was able to submit my designs to and then 3D print them in everything from stainless steel to gold. And those I usually did more on like when someone ordered a really expensive piece, I would print it on demand when they wanted it. And yeah, then I'd list it for sale online and usually try to share some of the educational materials and things that were related to the topic that it was representing.
I love it. The For anybody who's listening who is interested in design, I feel like the for 3D printing, there's only two types of people. There's people who like are in it to win it, are gonna just go for the gold, like are ready for that, and then there's the people who are interested but are worried about screwing things up.
Yeah,
Tinkercad is a phenomenal gateway drug for anybody that is interested in 3D modeling. Um,
100%.
yeah, so if you're interested, check out Tinkercad online. And the all the skills you need, you already have. Just go make some stuff, make it awesome, make it terrible, and give it a go. Um,
Hmm.
Alternatively, I want to just focusing on your sort of entrepreneurial endeavor. You said that your professor told you just go do it, you'll learn more. What did you pick up going through this process? Like, what were the skills that
Yeah.
you really honed in during this jewelry making endeavor?
The biggest things were business related for sure. I mean, like I learned how to start a company literally with paperwork. I learned about filing taxes and things like that. I did have some other people that worked for me for a period of time of hiring interns and things like that, especially. Most of the lessons were like cash flow, business, sales, that sort of thing, because I had the design experience. That's what I knew how to do. And right. And I was doing this to kind of learn the other aspect. And I'm really glad I did, because even though I'm not making jewelry still now, I've been able to carry all of those lessons learned into my current company. And when I have my company that I do now, it wasn't the first time I was starting one. I knew how to file the paperwork. I knew when I should have a lawyer that I asked to look over a contract and not try to do it myself. Like all of those very tangible business things that you might not really get experience in engineering school.
I love it. And what was the like was this operated out of your dorm room or like did you guys have an office? Like what did the actual like day to day of this look like?
It started out in my college apartment that was like one of those off-campus student apartments or whatever, 'cause I had a little more space to put my 3D printer. But then I did move into an incubator for a while, which I have to give a big shout out to the Selling Factory. I was their first company that was in there. They've since kind of changed their format of what exactly a Selling Factory does, but I had a lot of support on learning the business side of things because that was their focus of helping people without a selling and business background get better at selling. So I had a space in there. I had at most I had like two interns and things that were working for me that was helping with some of the design and fulfillment of everything. Um, and I had a lot of space because I was the first one in this area, so I was able to kind of like spread out a little more than maybe I would have otherwise.
And how like debating how to ask this question, like uh how far was your reach? I mean, I saw that you had designed what is it, a parachute skirt that like
Hmm.
kind of went pseudo viral and like, people on the Weather Channel were wearing it. Like,
Yes.
tell me about sort of like the act of seeing your designs like in the community and like how successful you feel you were with kind of getting those products out there.
It was really cool. The skirt was my most viral moment, which was kind of towards the end of my time doing Sci Chic, which was very funny. I again gave the design to Startorialists, those women, because again I was kind of like on my way out, like I don't want to do any more fulfillment. I've assembled enough pieces of jewelry for my entire life, but that was definitely the biggest success. Yes, Stephanie Abrams wore it on the Weather Channel. She's honestly been a huge supporter. She's a UF grad as well, and they featured my jewelry, my weather themed jewelry in a segment on the Weather Channel as well. So they've been great supporters. No, it was very cool to always ship something internationally. It was like super fun to be able to be like, okay, I know this has got worldwide reach now. I did a lot of in-person events, which was really fun because I'd bring my 3D printers and print stuff live there, and it was so fun to see. This was also a little earlier when not every school had a 3D printer in it now that does now, and like kids coming up and seeing 3D printing for the first time and explaining it to them was a very, very cool thing. And honestly, I think at most we were selling like a little over $5,000 in jewelry a month, which is not like crazy, but that, shows kind of like there was a decent quantity of this stuff going out there. I had a few retail and wholesale clients. And I think I could have expanded it more if I wanted to, but this was around the point where I was like kind of figuring out that I wanted my career to be science communication and not full-time making jewelry. And I'm super glad I did it. And I was able to, because of the type of business it was, dial it up and down at different points depending on what else was going on in my life. And I kind of dialed it into the background. I still did a little bit of it. And it was like more of a creative outlet than something I was trying to push to be my, income maker. But I'm really glad that I did it, and I still am very engaged in science fashion now, even if I'm not, like I said, actively selling jewelry online.
Yeah, you had a pretty rockin' Ms. Frizzle, outfit that made some waves too. So the
Yes.
fashionista is still full blown.
Oh, very much. I have a lot of space-themed jackets in my closet. That's my big one. So,
I love it. And last question, just about Sci
uh-huh.
Chic. I think I'm finally pronouncing it right. So
You
I've
got it.
grown. Evolution. Um,
Yes.
my just usually I'd save this for the end of the show, but just since you did this so early on in your career, for anybody who's listening that is like kind of interested in taking that leap to kind of start their own company,
Mhm.
especially students who are like maybe in their junior or senior year of college, any sort of like quick advice points for them that they may want to consider before kind of jumping into the business?
I'd say definitely if you're not in the business school, get engaged with that community a bit because there are a lot of business students that don't have the engineering skill that want to have a partner that can do that. So finding other people that can help fill your weaknesses then you could learn from, I think is a really great thing because my gosh, college is just such a great way to meet other people and find other people in that community to be able to launch this thing with. And also then don't feel like you have to get like a bunch of money of investment up front. I think oftentimes you get in this mindset of like pitch decks and got to get that initial funding and stuff. And the way I funded myself is I sold stuff to start out, which is slower, but I learned a lot doing that. And it helped me um, engage with my community and get feedback right away. So I think finding whatever your minimum viable product is that you're able to actually like sell and put out there rather than just focusing on, Shark Tank style, got to pitch and get that investment. That's the way I recommend going.
Awesome. Well, Aaron, thanks so much for that.
Mhm.
This is, I feel, going to be the conversation about big leaps. Like I'm just
Yeah.
picturing you as like, Superman jumping from one place to the next. Tell me about deciding to close the company and then make your way into science communication full time.
Yeah, there was a bit of overlap between those two. It was kind of a wind down of Sci Chic while the other dialed up, and I think for me, it was this part was less of a big leap and more of a Sci Chic helped me figure out what those next moves were. I was starting to, like I said, be a little bit more public on social media. I was doing some writing for guest blogs, which was partially promoting, Sci Chic, but also gave me that chance to write a bit more about my philosophy about making and again, engage more with that women in STEM online community. And the big kind of like factor that made me make the jump is I was starting to apply for science communication internships. So I've graduated. I had 4 engineering internships, and I was like, this isn't what I want to do full time. Fantastic. So glad I did them. But internships were my way that I knew to try things. So I applied for a bunch and I only got one interview and I ended up getting it, which was at The Economist in London for a fellowship writing for their science and technology section. And I went over to London for 4 months and was able to like work in a newsroom. Most of the other people there had PhDs in some area of science. The Economist is a really unique publication that it's I can't remember their slogan right now, but it's something like we don't tell you the news, we tell you what to think about the news, something like that. These are really smart people in every area of finance, business, science, and it was such a cool experience to be able to be immersed in this. And this made me go the science journalism route. My last week at that internship, I both got engaged and got a full-time job offer. So like in the very millennial way, I said I did all my adulting in 1 week there, finished a job, started a new one, and got engaged. And I came back and moved from Florida to Boston to work for MIT Technology Review. And all of this was just being very like open and putting myself out there and following where the opportunities took me. Because I didn't think necessarily these things were exactly what I wanted to do for my career, but they were moving me in the right direction. And combining these things that I loved, because my first job was at MIT Technology Review was writing about the future of work. So I got to do a lot of combining writing about manufacturing and automation, which tapped into a lot of my mechanical engineering background, which is why I got the gig. So at this time I was still running Sci Chic and shipping out necklaces and stuff. It just wasn't, I wasn't designing as many new things and I wasn't pushing for it as hard.
That's really interesting. I just love the fact that you went from like a business incubator to being like, I'm going across the pond. This seems like a good idea to like, I'm gonna
Yep.
work for the biggest, like institute of technology in the world, just casually,
Yeah,
just the thing people do.
I mean, and I have to say, part of the reason I was able to do that too is SciChic was pretty big at the time. The incubator helped me keep it running back in the US while I was gone. So I had an intern that was still helping me fill orders, and the guy that ran the incubator, he went and assembled some bracelets for me, and I super appreciate that because they kind of like helped me keep the status quo while I did that, since I didn't know exactly what my next move was going to be, and I was still considering trying to take SciChic to the next level, but I knew I had to chase this opportunity. And then from there, I decided, okay, science journalism, science communication, this is where I want to be. And like I said, I kind of dialed SciChic down. And it's sad to do that for any, project, but I think it was the right move, and I'm glad I did.
Yeah, having also closed a company, it's one of those things where you have like a solid year of mourning, and then
Yes,
all of a sudden you have a moment where you look back and you're like, oh, every single thing that happened now happened because I was willing to take all those risks back then and then close that thing. Oh, that's cool.
absolutely. Yeah, I know. It's closing something can be a good decision too.
Absolutely. In regards to your working for The Economist, working for the MIT Technology Review, um, I guess I'm curious about the sort of antiquated term is new media. But like when you were there, what type of media were you creating? Was it just journalism based, or were you like starting to kind of hone those skills of filmmaking and everything else you needed for your online work?
Yeah, they were definitely the start of the new media, but since I had never really worked in a professional newsroom before, a lot of it was learning some of the traditional journalism stuff. Like, I mentioned I was editor-in-chief of my high school paper. I'd done, freelance writing and stuff, but working in a newsroom is a different experience. At The Economist, I was doing a lot of writing for the magazine because they are one of the unique publications that like they're not as, at least when I was there, not as financial constrained because they have they're a status symbol a little bit in a strange way of like having that publication. So their magazine, hugely important. So I did write a lot for print, but I did a little bit of script writing for video. I was on their podcast a couple times. Like I was starting to dabble in a few of those things. At MIT Tech Review, I was actually really focused on email newsletters. So I was writing Clocking In, which was a future of work newsletter that was like I got to help launch. At one point, the writer of their like flagship daily newsletter called The Download left. Um, and so I took that on for a number of months, which was pretty hard because that person who wrote it was in the UK for a reason, so that the time zones worked. So I had to get up really early to write that for quite a period of time. Whew, it was a lot. And then all of it was, being adaptable. The person who ran their social media left, and I got to help start running their Instagram, which was a huge like lesson learner. Like I got to run a larger social media account for a certain period of time and help really grow that following, which was very cool. So I was still writing, a lot of articles, but it was published online primarily, newsletters, and then kind of like moved into that social media space too.
And out of all of those modes of communication, which one got you the most jazzed?
I think the newsletter was interesting because I got a lot of direct feedback from like readers. It was like developing a community, but that can also be very stressful when people disagree with you and you wake up to a bunch of emails on your phone from a bunch of readers who really want to tell you their opinion on the thing that you just talked about. I think I really appreciated the community building aspect of that. And I'm really glad I got the Instagram opportunity because I really wasn't doing that much social media before this. And during my time at Tech Review is when I pushed on my personal brand and social media a bit more.
Okay, cool. So moving on from Tech Review, you were there for almost 2 years.
Yeah.
Where did you head from there, Erin?
Well, that was my other big move. I applied online to a job for a NASA contractor. And people I say like, oh, how'd you get that thing? I literally found the job on Twitter and applied online. And I got it. So I moved down from Boston to Houston, Texas, where I am now, still am, have not moved since then. And I worked at Johnson Space Center as a science communication specialist for the International Space Station, which is a heck of a title for I got to help tell stories about the science that was conducted in space on the space station.
Just awesome. Like,
Yeah,
so awesome,
so
right?
cool. Yeah,
Twitter, something good came from Twitter might be the
yeah,
lesson that we picked up from this.
absolutely. Had a good way for finding jobs back in the day. So yeah.
Yeah, so tell us about, you did such a great job on your Instagram account of like documenting your first day at NASA. But tell us a little bit about sort of like that entry point of your career, like not only sort of what you did, but also like just how it felt to be a part of that community.
Yeah, it was really cool. I mean, I said my original, I've always loved space, right? And I think everyone went like, oh, of course Erin's working for NASA now. And I was like, okay, yes, but this wasn't like my definitely wanted to do this dream, but it was very, very cool to be able to be a part of this. And I think what I liked so much about working at NASA is there is really a lot of education focus. When you work in a lot of institutions, it's about like trying to get press coverage or when you're on the journalism side, being very critical of a lot of areas of science. If you're, a political reporter, you're not writing positive things about politics all the time. It's looking at things with a critical eye. But I learned that I really loved the education element of it and informing the public. And I got to work really closely with scientists, which I loved because my one of my favorite things to do in my job is getting to talk with scientists who are passionate about what they do and finding out like why do you love microgravity combustion research? Like why is this the thing you're spending your life on? And this was the area that I got to experiment a lot because I had a fantastic team that I worked on, especially two other women who were just stellar, one of my favorite teams I've ever worked on. And we got to kind of like pitch our projects. We were this rogue little comm team that wasn't within the public affairs office of NASA. We were embedded with like the program research office, which are the people that actually like coordinate the research that happens on the space station. So we got to work closer with the scientists, decide what were the projects that were best going to share what was going on, whether that was social media, mini documentary series, writing, and then just go for it. And yes, you had to deal with a lot of the NASA bureaucracy and what NASA is, but this team was really, really encouraging and allowed us to kind of like, I don't know, pursue that creative maker passion that I've always loved.
Yeah, like give us an idea of some of the projects that you worked on while you were there.
Well, I think my favorite one is we did a short form documentary series called NASA Explorers. This is a series that NASA has a number of seasons of, and we worked on season four, Microgravity, that followed two women who came up with an idea of what they wanted to research on the space station and followed them all the way from that to getting results, which science takes a long time. So that's about 2 years a 2 year journey and got to see them launch that experiment, do that experiment in space, have it come back down. One of the women had a kid over that period of time and be able to share that story, I think is really cool because oftentimes the only time people hear about research is when it launched or when the results came out. And putting these people behind it really put like a personal face behind it and showed what this process is like. So that was one of my favorites. And honestly, I got to work on that like right when I started because they were already halfway through it. Rachel Nicole, the other two people I was working with when I got there. So I got to like dive in. I didn't have to worry about pitching this project to NASA. I was just there. I got to help with scripting the voiceover and figuring out some of the storylines and how best to share this whole thing on social media. We got millions of views on it, so it was very cool.
That's so awesome. So I'm lucky enough. You are the third guest I've had on who's worked for NASA. Andrew and Kristen Looney, who own Looney Labs, which is a card game company, also had historically worked for NASA in
Uh-huh.
the late '80s and early '90s. And I'm kind of curious. Tell us about the culture of working for NASA and like the types of people you worked with, and just I'm going to leave it there. Like, tell us about the culture of working for NASA.
Every NASA group is very different, is something I've learned. People often ask me, like, well, what culture can I expect? And I was like, it's hard for me to say because every research group, every center, there's so many different types of areas that work there. So I worked for a NASA contractor, and which is a way that I think people often think almost everyone who works at NASA is employed by the federal government. But if you want to find jobs at NASA, I highly recommend looking at contractors who are like NASA hires on to be able to work there. And it was a combination of extremely creative and extremely bureaucratic. So it's like a lot of really smart, incredible people, all, but 17 people have to review everything you put out. So as like an artist, it was a little difficult, which is honestly the reason I do what I do now is because I wanted to be able to be a little bit more free and not have 5 hours of meetings a day. But I also got to, like I said, I worked in the same building as the astronauts. Like, how cool is that? And just everyone there cares so much about what they're doing. It's ranked one of the best places to work in the federal government for a reason every single year. And I think that it's just that there's just such a shared mission of why everyone is there and everyone's on the same page about that. And you really are, helping push the cutting edge of this really incredible thing. So I think amazing also training grounds for so many science communicators because there's so many different areas around NASA that all have to share what they do. I think it's a really great place to be able to learn from both scientists and communicators before going on to something else too, unless if you don't want to have a 40-year career at NASA.
Yeah. Plus, in the realm of graffiti, Aaron, your name went to space.
Yeah, it did. I guess a sign, which I always call it as the thing that deploys trash out of the space station. It also does research in it, but it's funnier to say that it's the thing that deploys trash. Yeah.
Tell us about that project real quick.
Yeah, that was one of the video projects we were doing with that same communications team. It was actually during COVID. We went over to NanoRacks, which is one of the companies that like helps get stuff to space. And it's this called the Bishop Airlock. And they were launching, it's a commercial airlock that is now attached to the space station. And so inside of it, they can conduct research and things, but they can also put large containers of trash that are then sent to burn up in the atmosphere in it. So while we were there, it was just a little bit before it was going to launch, and they had a big piece of it that we all got to sign with Sharpie, which was fun.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to recognize that, like, I'm a firm believer that the whole it takes a village is very true, and it doesn't matter whether or not you're working in custodial affairs or you're, a lead
Hmm.
engineer. The culture that everybody brings together is what helps to generate great ideas. And your great ideas resulted in a Silver Snoopy Award, which I think is
Yeah.
pretty neat. Can you
It's
tell
actually
us?
behind me over here. That's it.
Oh
So
my God!
the
So
certificate. Yeah.
So I'll explain a little bit about what I think it is, and then
Hmm.
please feel free and disregard everything I say and correct it.
Okay.
But from what I understand, it's an award that NASA designed in order to recognize the support systems that NASA employees or NASA contractors put in place to ensure the safety of astronauts.
Hmm.
And my favorite thing about it is that it's called the Silver Snoopy Award because Charles Schultz, the creator of Peanuts, gave NASA permission to use his character as a way to recognize people.
Hmm.
And it's one of the few times that him and I forget if it's United or King Features, gave them permission to use it without any royalty. So it was just like
Yes.
a gift back to the U.S. government, which I think is neat. And he drew the Snoopy that is used for that. So tell us a little bit about this process of kind of receiving the award.
Yes, and you're correct. I think the only thing I'd add is it's been expanded a little bit beyond just pure safety to be an award that Oh, it's kind of an award from the astronauts to be able to give out to people that have really made a difference for those expeditions in a unique way. So it was given to me largely for my work on social media for the ISS_research Twitter account, as well as I was there when Instagram Reels became a thing, and kind of pioneering these to really share space station research stories. I was also really involved in I led the revamp of something called the International Space Station Benefits for Humanity project, which was a way to share at that point, it was 20 years of research that had been done on the space station and how it benefits us back here on Earth. And it had been done, it's like kind of revamped every 3 to 4 years, but it was just every time just growing in size as a book. And it was just becoming like a big thing you could slap down on the table and be like, look, we've done a ton. And no one really read it. So I helped revamp it to make it more digital friendly, as well as make it more of a magazine rather than a textbook. We rewrote all of the stories, picked out some of the most impactful ones, and were able to. It was partially contributed to helping get the station extended to 2030, just a small piece of that. But yeah, I got to receive the award. Jessica Meir gave it to me, and you're kind of like told that you're getting it as a surprise during like a meeting. Like you get called and told you're presenting, and then they surprise you and tell you you're getting this award, which is much better than having to do a presentation at a meeting. And then they have a big ceremony where all the people from a certain period of time get pinned and get the certificate that I have on my wall behind me. And the pin, in addition to being a little Snoopy, actually flew in space, which was super cool. So I have two things that have flown in space. I have that and a patch that's like for space station research that was flown.
Oh, that's so amazing. Well, congratulations on that award. I think that,
Thanks.
that is no small comeuppance, right? Like that's a big, big accomplishment. Um, but you left NASA, Erin.
Mhm.
Like you decided to move on and go freelance, if I understand. Like tell us about that sort of process out, and then tell us about what you're doing now.
Yeah, it was a hard choice. I'm someone who likes to do a lot of things if you can't tell. So I felt like I had gotten an offer to have a more of a management position at NASA. And when I got that offer, I was kind of like, okay, I have to pick what direction I want to go here because I feel like I love being a science communicator here, but I don't feel like there's a lot of room for growth without going into management. And as someone who's so much of a maker, yes, I'm good at managing projects and I'm good at managing people, but it's not necessarily where I wanted my career trajectory to go. And so I've been doing stuff on the side like this whole time. I've been doing some freelance writing, I've been doing some social media content creation and kind of sharing my NASA experience. And it honestly been growing a fair amount, but I was having to turn down a number of things for conflict of interest at NASA. You have to be really careful about to make sure you're like, um, your work at NASA comes first. And so I had an offer to be on a reality show that I turned down. It was the Domino Masters, which was like the Lego Masters spinoff. And it just because that would be like 9 weeks. I can't go take 9 weeks off work. So I was kind of at this point where I was like, all right, let's just push here and see how big I can get this. And once I get it to a certain amount, I can kind of make the choice to leave. And thankfully, I was on a team with, I think the best managers are people that understand the direction that you want to go and encourage you in that. And I started being a little bit more open about, especially once I turned the management job down of like, hey, this is more the direction I want to go. And I had more of a 4 month kind of like training period with someone who was going to come in and replace me. And kind of set my end date of April 2023 and really, like I said, really pushed and was doing a lot of work to build up my client base and be like, hey, this is what I'm about to do. And then made the leap to go on my own. And so what I officially started is my company is now called Steam Power Media. It's just me right now. However, I have it's been very cool. The last couple of months, I've been able to hire on some up and coming science communicators and science communicator friends to do a few things, which is partially my goal to support all these science communicators who also want to find an in to this very hard area to jump into. Um, and yes, I do make content for myself, but I help everyone from, CBS Mission Unstoppable, a TV show about women in STEM, to Astrolab, a lunar rover company, to Zero G, who does parabolic flights, really share their science stories with the public and their technical stories and being able to serve as a translator between engineers. Sometimes I'm helping engineers better learn how to share the stories themselves. Sometimes I'm in front of the camera. Sometimes I'm filming little science documentaries that are then edited. So it's a huge range of just helping people share their stories about science, technology, engineering, math to the world.
That's amazing. I just one question about that sort of like
Hmm.
I don't know that bridge
That jump.
between yeah that
Yeah.
is like um how much of it do you think the success of this came from your ability to market yourself on social media? Like you had a pretty solid presence before you left.
Yeah, I honestly, I think that the biggest reason I've been able to be successful is being so open about what I do. I think being as honest as you can is also really important, and not just sharing the moments when you're, flying with the Blue Angels or something. I haven't done that, but like just the big peak, like cool things. I think sharing the mundane and the little projects and stuff has been really helpful. And especially I'm a big networker, and a big like so I'm not someone who like expects something to happen right now, but I like maintaining relationships, being open with different people, building things, and basically being in front of people enough that when they need someone to do this, they think of me. Um, and so, yes, that's a huge part. And when I say social media, it's not just, Instagram, TikTok, it's LinkedIn for sure, it's Facebook, these other places that I think aren't as thought of as flashy, but they're a place where the people who might hire me to do this stuff are.
Yeah, that was one thing I was curious about is like that relationship between you approaching companies and saying like, "Hey, I'd like to provide support for you," versus companies finding you and saying like, "Hey, we need you to go and experience zero gravity for a little while." Like,
Yeah.
tell me about that sort of relationship.
Mostly, it has been people reaching out to me, which has been incredible. It's been however, I've been doing a number of these people I've worked with over the years for a while, and it's just when I was leaving on my own, I was able to do more with those places. A lot of people have emailed me reaching out and being like, hey, we saw this thing you did. Is this something you'd be interested in? I have a number of opportunities that have been local here to Houston because we have a pretty big space community. For example, Astrolab, the Lunar Rover company I mentioned, I got referred to them by someone who works at NASA to their PR person, and that's how that opportunity came about. Here at Space Center Houston, I do a lot of work with them. They found me just through kind of like the online influencer community and saw that I do space stuff and I'm in Houston, and now I'm able to do a fair amount with them. Um, so I have to say most of the opportunities of people coming to me or have been me kind of like building up to something with a place. Like of someone, might put out a call for help about this thing and I'll just shoot a message over. But most of it isn't pure cold calls. Almost all of it is they know me from something and I see an opportunity to reach out. For example, SolidWorks, the company that I mentioned that I do a bunch of design work with, their big conference this year is going to be in Houston. So I reached out. And engineering.com, I was like, hey, you want any articles written? I live right down the road. And just finding those, keeping tabs on everything to see when those opportunities can come out.
Yeah, it's super cool, and I think you do such a good job of like helping connect the dots for people. I mean, just
Mhm.
like trying to find my notes. So if I botch this, my apologies. But
You're fine.
is it the Houston Space Center? Is that the
Oh,
name?
Space Center Houston. Yeah.
Space Center
Uh-huh.
Houston, you did a project with them where you wrote about a series of holiday programs they were doing, and you used SolidWorks to design a holiday ornament that
Yes.
people could see, how you used it and how you displayed it, and then could download the STL file to be able to like use it on their own. And I just think there's something so cool about being able to demonstrate to different contingencies that like these pieces of software and these programs can work in harmony together,
Yeah.
and then further demonstrate that to the community as like, hey, I'm the nerdy science girl, but look what I was able to do that demonstrates my love of science and this program and whatnot. Like I think you do such a great job of marrying all of those things.
Thanks. No, it was a bunch of fun, and I have to give credit to Space Center Houston. They came to me with that idea because I've worked with them a number of times now, so they follow me and see what I do. But I have to give them credit. They came to me and said, "Hey, would you be interested in designing an ornament for us for this the holiday season?" Because I'd worked with them for Galaxy Lights as their like holiday thing this past year, and I talked about the science of light, and I made like a cool video and blog about that. And they were like, "Hey, do you want to bring in your like 3D modeling stuff?" And I was like, "This is an amazing idea. Yes, I love this." So kudos to Rochelle over at Space Center Houston for that one.
So awesome. And you're doing a lot of, just because we talked about this a little bit before, but like you're doing a lot of work for a company called Zero G. Do you mind
Yeah.
telling us, just because everyone's going to want to do the thing? So tell us about Zero G, please.
Yes. So speaking of ways that opportunities came about, the Greg who manages Zero G, their like marketing, is also in Houston and saw that I share a bunch of stuff about microgravity science because that's really my expertise after spending 4 years working on International Space Station stuff. And so Zero G is a parabolic flight company, and basically what that means is they have a plane, a big commercial jet that goes up and down in kind of like an arcing pattern. And like if you throw a ball, like think of the top of the arc where then like it starts to come down, or if you're on a roller coaster and you feel like that bit of weightlessness when you're at like the top of a hill. They do that, but on like a massive scale, such that when you fly on those arcs, you get like 20 to 30 seconds of microgravity. You float inside the plane. And a bunch of researchers use this, especially for testing things out before they send them to space. Because in space, you got one shot at it. And if it sends it up, you send it up there and it breaks and doesn't work, well, that's it. And on this, they're able to test things. Well, they on their research flights, they spend do 30 parabolas, so 30 up and downs, and so you get about 15 minutes of microgravity. And the researchers are able to be on there with their science and actually do it. And so it's a great way for these companies to test this. They also do lunar gravity flights. So companies that want to send stuff to the moon are able to test out a bunch of stuff there too. And so they reached out to me saying, we really want to be better about sharing our research that we do on these flights because it's such a huge part of what they do, but it's not what they're thought of for first. Like Mr. Beast from YouTube just went on one, and that's what everyone thinks of when they think of Zero G is like, which that is a cool thing that they do too. Any person out there can go pay money and go fly on this and experience microgravity, which is awesome. But they're also really helping advancing this next era of space technology. And so I have now flown on three of these flights, and I'm flying on them to help explain this research. So some of it, man, I will say it's hard to deliver a script in 30 seconds when you're floating. But luckily, they sent me on one flight first before I had to worry about like doing any scripts so that I could figure out what it felt like and experience it, which thank you to them. They had like a seat open on a Houston flight and it worked out. And then these other flights I've been on, like literally there's research happening all around me and I have to be really careful not to float over it. But I'm like floating next to it with my hair flying, like talking about this really cool research that's able to control the movement of metals using electromagnets as a potential like future space technology, and someone else who's doing cryogenic research right down there. And so I've made a whole bunch of videos with them from these two flights, which should be coming out when this airs. Maybe a few of them have been out. Check out the Zero G page as well as my own for those. And hopefully I'll be flying on more down the line to share this cool research.
It's so cool. I mean, like it reminds me of OK Go did a music video where they had
Yes.
utilized the same approach before it was accessible in the US.
Uh-huh.
So they were kind of doing their thing, but also like you did this awesome what do I want to call it, exercise infomercial
Oh,
talking
yes.
about doing are push-ups too hard on Earth? Like here's lunar gravity push-ups, and it's just such a cool way to like do what I think you want to do, which is
Hmm.
keep people stoked about science.
Yeah.
Um, I, I just got to ask, as somebody who gets violently motion sick,
Yeah.
it makes me sad as I was looking at their price structures. I was like, oh, that's a really
Yeah.
interesting risk. But having done this 3 times already, just kind of explain, not even from your job, but just as like somebody who's stoked about having this experience, like what's it like to experience anti-gravity?
Yeah, I honestly, especially after working at NASA on microgravity science for 4 years, it just felt so meaningful. I like to get this opportunity. And I'll touch on the motion sick thing first. I'm someone who gets a little bit motion sick. Like literally, I was a human research test subject for NASA for a bit, where they brought me in for motion sickness research because I get, quote, the perfect amount of motion sick where I'm not going to throw up, but I'll feel bad enough that they can test drugs on me, which I think that's a good thing. So I was a little nervous going into this because I think it has a reputation, yes, for causing motion sickness. But they made me feel a lot better about it because they do so many things that if you listen to them and don't take any like risks, as long as you're not someone who gets like immediately motion sick always. Um, I took motion sickness medicine. The part you actually are more likely to get motion sick on is like the 2G part. So when you're going up like to the top before you're floating, you're like being pressed down into the floor. You're supposed to look straight up at the ceiling at like one specific point. When people get into trouble is when they turn their head because there's like, fluids in your head. And imagine, with when you have 2G pressing out on your whole body, you're fine. But then you have like 2G going straight between your ears, and that's when you get into trouble. And people get excited and they try to turn to talk to their person they're with, and that's what causes the motion sickness primarily. So it also got better over the course of them. Like I got more relaxed and I got less nervous about being motion sick, which made me less motion sick. The research ones are twice as long as the public ones too. So I had some like little alcohol wipes that you could like sniff if you're feeling anything. So I was able to deal with that, and it's absolutely worth it for me. It was so cool. It's really hard to compare it to anything. The closest is swimming. However, like that's what your body thinks you're doing. So your like body wants you to start flailing and like swimming, but that doesn't move you at all. You have to push off of the wall. So it's very funny. Almost everyone in their first time in microgravity, they look like they're just swimming in nothing and they move nowhere. And you learn it's all more about like small movements. And the plane is small enough that like if you're I'm 5'8". I can stand and like reach up and just touch the middle of the plane. So you can know you can get control of yourself at any point. But it's very, very unique. It's cool. I just to have that feeling that you just can't really get anywhere else other than space was really incredible. And I hope more people get the chance to do it. They have some really cool programs to send teachers up as well. So something to take a look at if you are an educator to like look at those programs. The other way is if you are a scientist, this is something that you can have as part of your funding if it's something that you're looking at microgravity research down the line. It's a really often a way. That's how all of my friends who have flown have gotten to fly is by doing research studies on board.
I'm not going to say that the teacher in this conversation just wrote send email to 0G, but he might have.
Yeah, if you look up, there's someone who's been sharing, I think they've been resharing. There's like one person who runs this teacher program. So to take a look at that, I can't remember exactly who it is, but if you Google enough, I'm sure you'll be able to find it. So
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate it. I one last question just about steam power media before we talk about things that involve you not staring at smartphones all the time.
uh-huh.
Where do you want to take this company? Like, what is your sort of like long-term aspiration? Because you're already doing amazing stuff, Erin. Like, where does it go from here?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I have said that this April, I want to kind of like take stock of where I'm at and where I want to go from here. Because I think there's a few directions I could go. One of them is I really do want to be able to give more opportunities to, as I mentioned, especially up and coming science communicators that are trying to find these gateways in. So right now, one of the other projects I'm doing is working with an education company that's producing like a huge amount of videos for national curriculum standards and things like that. And so I was able to bring on a number of script writers, and I was able to bring in a couple students who are getting their PhDs right now to be able to help write, especially on scripts on their area of expertise. So being able to continue to do things like that and be able to help these sort of people build their portfolios up, that's definitely a goal for me. Maybe at some point building that into internships too. Um, and but I think that I could hire people. My debate is whether to hire people or give myself the flexibility to kind of keep doing what I'm doing now and just continuing to chase those science adventures. I'm wearing a shirt for the other big thing I did. I went on an ocean expedition from December to February of last year, and like things that get me close to the science. Like that's what you can kind of hear as a trend of going on an ocean expedition where science is happening, going on these zero G flights, working at NASA close to the science, wherever I can find opportunities to work directly with the scientists to help them share those stories, keep finding new ones and keep chasing those adventures.
Yeah, and I think it's just like the thing that I think is just really important to point out is whether or not it's science or pro wrestling or whatever you're into, like no one is ever going to just come find you and be like, I've got this thing that maybe you might have interest in. Can I ask you about it? You
Yeah.
always go to the person who has expressed that interest in something.
Yeah.
And I just love the fact that like you're basically a lighthouse for science positivity. And then people like look to the lighthouse and say like, oh, Erin is the one that's going to help us solve this communication problem. Or Erin is the one who we don't even know what our communication problem is, but Erin will be able to help us identify it and then be able to make us more accessible to the rest of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so glad it's worked out. Sometimes it's a little bit of experimenting when you go out on your own, and it's been really rewarding to see so many people look to that lighthouse and come to me. And honestly, so many great partners. Like all the people that work in this space are really incredible, and I've had just so many wonderful experiences with it.
Awesome. Well, I want to talk about some of your personal interests before we depart because
Uh-huh.
you
You have a hoodie on that signals to me to what it might be about. Yeah.
well, I was going to save this one for maybe next, but the first thing I wanted to ask you about was
Okay.
actually puzzles,
Oh, okay.
because I know that you're really into puzzles,
Mhm.
and I was wondering if you could tell us about your just how puzzles play a role in your life.
Yeah, well, it's funny. So I'm sitting in my office right now. On the other side of my computer is a puzzle. I have a desk in my office that I try to keep something going that if I need just a break during the day, I can go like over to it for a few minutes. Because when you work from home, you kind of have to figure out those things that help you break up the day when you don't have like other coworkers or a water cooler you're going to and that sort of thing. You can work, eat at your desk, that sort of stuff. So yeah, I've always loved doing jigsaw puzzles. I'm a big fan of if you're familiar with Karen Puzzles on YouTube. She does speed puzzling championships. And I think she's a really great model for niche hobby content creators out there. I love watching her stuff while I puzzle. And I think I'm someone who my brain is always going 9,000 miles an hour on like a lot of different stuff. And puzzles are a way for me to kind of just be able to hone in my focus on a thing, relax for a little bit. And it is still like a maker, like hands-on sort of thing away from my computer that kind of breaks me away from the screens.
Uh, Two questions. One,
Yeah.
have you ever made your own puzzle?
I have not. I had someone who made a puzzle for me. I have like a wooden puzzle that someone cut for me. That's of I The other cool thing, I was in a Marvel comic book a long time ago, and like I know if the Unstoppable Wasp, they had like a series where they were featuring women in STEM. So they made a puzzle of my drawing in the Marvel comic book. But no, I have never made one myself.
All right, question 1A. Do you happen to know who wrote and drew it?
Yes, I'm like, what? It's been too long since I looked it up. Let me see if I can Google it real quick. But um, Jeremy Whitley was the one. But it's a very like women in STEM focused comic book. They didn't make a ton of them, but highly recommend looking it up. It's very fun.
That's awesome. I was also featured in a DIY Kickstarter comic. So congrats on our accolades. We're illustrated.
Woohoo!
Um,
Yay!
and then the second question is, have you done competitive puzzling?
No, because the other thing I do fulfills my competitive aspect, which we'll talk about in a second. Puzzling, I have kept chill. However, I do have a friend of mine, Ruby Zoom. She big drill energy on social media, and she really likes puzzling. And we've talked about potentially trying to fly to one somewhere and meet up to do one. So it might be in my future at some point. But so far, I've kept it as a relaxed hobby.
Maybe we need some sort of like 3D puzzle thing you can do in zero G. Like,
Oof, that's gonna be a
hmm.
challenge with all the puzzle pieces floating around. You gotta have something to secure them to, and like, yeah.
Yeah, that's why I'm like magnets. All right,
Yes.
I'll think this through.
Okay, let me know.
And then the other thing, for listeners who are unfamiliar, I own a pinball arcade called the Skillshot Arcade in Syracuse, New York. Aaron, do you like pinball?
Yeah, I like pinball quite a bit. I started playing like competitively a little over 2 years ago now, and me, the content creator online, I create so much stuff, content about science and space. I was like, you know what? I want to take a complete break and just make some content about this other thing I love, and people seem to enjoy it. So I have been documenting my process of learning to play pinball ever since I was bad when I was getting last place in every tournament. And it's fun to now be able to look back through that because I'm competing in the women's state pinball championships this year for the first time. I got 14th out of 16 in the qualifiers, so I just made it in, but it's been fun to be able to feel myself get better at this competitive hobby.
Yeah, and for those who are kind of unfamiliar with this,
Yeah.
the International Flipper Pinball Association is an international group that makes it so that as you compete in tournaments throughout the year, you get certain points. Points put you in different brackets, and then at the end of the year, December is always fun because you can see people who are just spending all of their time playing in tournaments, trying to get the magic points to be able to get
Hmm.
them into the tournaments. But every year each state on the same day has a general tournament on typically Saturday, and then Sunday the women's tournament, and all the people who win those tournaments are then offered to go to the national competition, which is really really neat. We Not to just keep plugging my own stuff, but we were lucky enough to host at Skillshot the New York State Pinball Championship
Oh,
and the New York State
cool.
Women's Pinball Championship last year. And I'll just be upfront that, like, as a business owner, it was a major stressor. And then
Oh,
as it was happening, I talk about networking. Some of my new best friends over the last year are people that I met at these tournaments,
fun.
and it's just a really cool thing. Erin, what was your gateway drug into pinball?
So I've played pinball when I was a kid a bit. My dad and I would play Funhouse, which is this like famous one that has this like creepy talking head on it, at like my local diner. And the biggest other thing was grew up playing Space Cadet Pinball on Windows, the one that came free. And I've even streamed it again on TikTok a few times, and people always are pumped about it 'cause everyone's nostalgic memory of pinball. But it's not been something like I've played forever. I've just kind of always liked it. I played a lot of the Williams game on Wii. Williams is one of the major pinball manufacturers. They're not around anymore, but they had a lot of their games, and you could play it with like the nunchucks on Wii. And I learned like the rules of games like Taxi and Black Knight and stuff like that. So I saw Houston had a pretty big scene, and I moved here just like a few months before COVID hit, so I really didn't have a community in my city. And so when we were, kind of coming out of COVID a bit, I was really trying to find that community and came across some pinball Twitch streams. Wormhole Pinball is like our big one here in Houston that does some streaming, and I saw their Twitch stream, and I saw this community, and I had like another arcade near me, so I went out by myself to my first tournament, and everyone was super cool and welcoming and helpful, and they got me hooked.
That's so cool. And sincerely, congratulations on making it
Thanks.
into the championships this year. What are, for people, let's talk to people who are not pinball people for a
Yeah.
second. And for people who are interested in going out and maybe playing some of your favorite games, are there any ones that they should maybe go try to hunt out in their own towns?
Sure. Well, I think, there's a lot of different eras of pinball machines. Pinball machines have been around for a long time. So it depends on what you're looking for. If you like a lot of like flashy, cool lights and stuff, you probably want to go with a more modern machine. And from modern machines, I love Godzilla and Metallica. And those are modern Stern machines. I I will say it's maybe not the most beginner friendly, but I love it. Labyrinth by Barrels of Fun. I was in the trailer for the pinball machine when it was released, so I'm a little biased. But they manufactured here in Houston, so I've gotten to go to the factory, and it's very cool to see. But I think for like people who are just starting out, look at some of the older machines too. Some of the electromechanicals are a lot simpler. There's not some like crazy rules that you have to learn about the pinball machine. You can just try to hit the spinner with the ball, and it feels really great. There's a fun game called Space Odyssey that's at our local arcade. I think Space Shuttle is a good one in between that we have a lot of space themed machines around here, around NASA. But honestly, it's just go out, flip the flippers around, have a good time. There's a lot of things you can try to learn to get better, but at its core, it's just fun.
And what about pinball excites you the most?
I love being able to get away from the computer and do something with my hands. I'm definitely a competitive person too. But I haven't really had a competitive outlet, and it's fun to kind of have that in like a fun community way. I enjoy being able to do more than anything, like hang out with this community. I have like a number of different community. Houston's very big and we have a ton of arcades around. And so like there's a lot of these like micro communities within the Houston pinball community. And being able to like every Tuesday meet up with the same people and like see what's going on with them. And you have a thing to do and focus on, but you're still able to talk the whole time, meet new people that come out and are traveling through. Every time I travel for work, I know I can seek out a local arcade, especially one that's having a tournament that night, and meet a bunch of people in that area too. So the social aspect and the competitive aspect, I think, are my favorite parts.
I love it. And I literally was just talking with a friend earlier today about like, how do you reset yourself? And I think the best way to do it is to help find communities that allow you to just exist within the things that bring you joy.
100%. Yeah.
Well, so at the time of this broadcast, Erin will have totally crushed everyone in San Antonio playing at What's Brewing. So you'll be able to find that video on demand, hopefully available. It will be live streamed. Erin, before we depart, I always like to just sort of make space. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to chat about before we debrief?
I guess I just encourage people to go out and seek out some cool science stuff online for yourself. I think we always create these little bubbles for ourselves online, and so go out and find some new cool scientists or researchers to follow out there, and just bring it into your social media consumption life, whether it's some of the people I mentioned or see if you look at who different creators are engaging with. There's some other, Emily Calandrelli is a fantastic representative for Women in STEM Online, Kelly Girardi. And you can find me online at Erin Winick on all platforms, which is ErinWinick.
Awesome. And we started this off talking about Bill Nye the Science Guy, Carl Sagan, Stephen Hawking, Neil deGrasse Tyson, now Erin Winick Anthony. And I just want to reiterate for listeners who are maybe thinking, science isn't my thing. I guarantee science is your thing. Because I think, Erin, you do such a great job of making all science accessible and helping us recognize the science and things that maybe we don't necessarily think of as inherently sciencey. So go check out Erin on all platforms. It's well worth your time.
No, well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Erin, thanks so much for being on the show. This was such a joyful conversation.
Thanks for having me. This was so much fun.
Erin, thanks so much for coming on the show and sharing your story. I am over inspired. I don't even know how to describe it, but I'm ready to save my pennies, experience zero gravity, and then figure out how on earth you communicate that or make puzzles in space. At some point, I'll figure out that problem. But it was a joy to hear your story, and for anybody who's interested, I strongly suggest checking out Erin's website, www.erinwinick.com, just to hear more about science communication. Moving forward, for our next episode, there is more magic, or dare I say laughs, coming to the Meditations with Ryan Zlomek podcast. For episode 43 on March 12th, we're going to have Laura Hall on the show. And if you're somebody who has ever watched the TV show Whose Line Is It Anyway, Laura is the music director for that show, or was the music director for 21 seasons, playing piano and working in tandem with different improv performers to make magic happen on screen. In over 400 episodes of Whose Line Is It Anyway, she provided music from every single genre for people like Wayne Brady to sing along to based on prompts from the audience. So if you're somebody with a music background or an interest in improv comedy, or just somebody who wants an interesting background on how TV production works, this episode is for you. And again, that is March 12th, right here on Meditations. We're going to have Laura Hall on the show. Equally, if you liked what you heard today and you want to dig into the back catalog a little bit, get a little more sciencey, you can check out some of my previous episodes to just sort of stay in that science mindset. On episode 1, I had Ben T. Matchstick and Pete Talbot on the show. They're the inventors of the Pinbox 3000, a cardboard pinball machine that has taken STEM classrooms by storm. On episode 14, I had Jennifer Johnson on the show talking about her sort of scientific approach to doing vegan baked goods for her company Isotope Desserts. On episode 22, I had two former NASA scientists, Andrew Looney and Kristen Looney, the creators of Looney Labs. They had left NASA and formed their own board game company. That might be of interest. And then on episode 25, I had app developer Kent Sutherland, who is the creator of Fantastical, who's thinking about ways to save people time through his application development. So go and check out that back catalog. There are 41 other episodes with interesting stories just around the corner. As always, I want to thank you for listening to the show. If you appreciated or found value in what you heard, please go consider giving it a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or on Google. Wherever you listen to your podcasts, the more that positivity gets out about the show, the higher a chance people have of finding it. Equally, if you're interested in finding out more about me, you can find The World of Ryan Zlomek on Facebook, and you can find me on Blue Sky, on TikTok, on Instagram, at Ryan Zlomek. Equally, you can reach out to me directly, meditations@ryanzlomek.com. Thanks so much for your support. Thanks so much for your curiosity. And remember, make space for conversation because you just might learn something. Have a wonderful, curious day.